Hey, yo, welcome back to It's Not Just You. We have got two burning questions to answer today. The first is, why am I no longer motivated to do my dream job? And the second is, how can I manage my anxiety around the election? So we're going to get into both of them. First, I'm Gretchen Diekenicker, founder and career coach at Unbound and Unbothered, where I help folks who feel stuff stifled or at a crossroads figure out a solution that doesn't involve burning out or burning it all down. So we're going to dive in today. We have a lot to cover, so I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time up front, but just give you a couple quick housekeeping things. So coming up on November 8th, next Friday at, I always get the time wrong, 11 a.m. Pacific, we're doing a masterclass called No More Playing Small. Speak up, stand out, get what you deserve. So if you're struggling with confidence or self-doubt, this is the one for you. So make sure you come. It's free. You can find it on my website at Unbound and Unbothered if you're watching on the live stream. And if you're here live, Amy will probably drop that link so you can sign up right now. And speaking of coming live, we are on the Zoom. If you're watching on the live stream and you're like, I want to be with the other people, I want to be in the chat, I want to network, then come here, because at 30 minutes after, and there's a link somewhere, I think when I look at it, it's this way, but I have to figure it out. But I'm gonna test this way. I'm gonna look at it and I'm gonna see if I'm pointing the right direction. But there's a link in one of these directions where you can come join us live on the Zoom. Actually, that might be the live. No, it isn't. It isn't. It's true. Okay. So come join us there. I love a lively chat. I see many of you who've been here before, so you know the drill. Drop it in there. I love to keep these super interactive. And I think today's topics will be, particularly the second one, will be a lot of chat going on. So let's spend some time in it. And so question one, why am I no longer motivated to do my dream job? So this one's interesting because motivation, from a pure thought work, mindset work sort of standpoint, motivation and a lack of it come out of a freeze response. But a freeze response has a really interesting impact on our nervous system. And so sometimes, the thing that is interesting is we can be motivated by our thoughts, like, I'm so excited to get started, right? That kind of thought can create motivation. But a lot of times, particularly when we're stuck or we're procrastinating, it's actually the motivation will come after we get started. If it's something we don't want to do, but we need to do it, the motivation actually comes afterwards. So I'm going to try to break this down because this question is interesting. I don't actually know what this person is feeling, right? It could be that I'm going to dive into them in a second. Let me just talk about the nervous system responses. So already covered that motivation comes from both thoughts and actions, right? I see a future state that will come from taking this action and I will take it, right? But we might be stuck in overwhelm, procrastination. We might shut down and just be like, I am totally paralyzed on this couch, right? We can get out of a freeze response, what I was just alluding to, with a micro yes. This is like the tiniest possible thing. It feels so tiny that it almost feels not worth doing. That's your micro yes. That's the way where if you just do one thing where you're like, this entire living room, it is a disaster. I'm going to take this water glass into the kitchen. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to sit on this couch again. You just have to have a micro yes, because if you're like, the whole house is a mess, if I just clean the bathroom, right? And then you could feel really good about it. And that might motivate you to do something else, right? But a lot of times, particularly with things we don't want to do, motivation is after we take some kind of action. So, but I'm thinking in this case, based on how the question is worded, that it's likely coming from your thoughts that you don't feel motivated, that the dream job isn't what you thought it would be, or you thought you would be a different person, or you would feel differently once you got the job. That would be my best guess, but I'm going to try to coach to each of these things, because it could also be, I got the thing and now I'm afraid I'm going to lose it, right? That's our third way of thinking about why is there a loss of motivation to do this thing? We could be operating from fear. We got in the chat here. I just gotta Oh, Ashley said the micro yes is such a powerful tool. I think Martha Beth talks about it as turtle steps. Yeah. And BJ Fogg calls it tiny habits and like baby steps. Yeah, it's talked about a lot. I got micro yes from Britt Frank, who wrote a phenomenal book called The Science of Stuck that like I love because she's really relatable, but it's like a lot of scientific backing on like why we get stuck in a freeze response, why we get overwhelmed, why we procrastinate, a lot of trauma informed things. She's a licensed therapist, so it's interesting. She said, talks about breaking it down as turtle steps or breaking down the big tasks into small enough pieces until you feel something inside you shift and say, okay, I think I can do that. Right. And then I think Britt Frank takes it just one step further where she talks about like hers is a lot of like if this is trauma induced, right? That you like particularly depression or recovering from substance abuse or something like that, where it can feel really, really hard to just take. And so that tiny, just like the most simple possible thing where you're like, that's not even worth doing, right? Like if the whole living room's a disaster and you're like, it's not even worth taking this class in there. But if that's your mindset, then the next thing that, right. And then it'll just go out from there. All right. I'm getting a little off track. We have a lot of covered. Oh, yeah. Ashley likes a book recommendation. I love this book. And she even created a workbook to go with it more recently. But I always say get the audiobook, but like she reads it herself and she's really funny. I really, really love her. She used to be an absolute hot mess. And so I love how honest she is. Okay. So how does our socialization play into this feeling of stuck? So we do get socialized in like this fairy tale thing, right? Where there's this future state where we're happy and everything's perfect, right? It's a little Disney princessy, but that can also create unrealistic standards and pressures of what something should feel like, right? We thought if we got this job that we would feel different about our work or ourselves, we would feel fulfilled, right? But there's maybe that expectation needs to be examined. We also have a lot of internalized beliefs about our productivity and worth and achievement and how important that is, right? So it might not feel as prestigious as we thought it would. It might not give us that feeling of like, I've arrived that we thought we were going to get if we got this job, right? We're also taught to be liked over respected and not to be too much, right? And also to be a good girl and to do it right. And so what could be playing is a theme in here too is like, I really thought I'd like this job. It turns out I don't. But particularly if you spent a lot of education or a lot of time, or you worked several years to get this role and it's not what you like, it's just not something you enjoy, then that can be really hard because then we're going to tell ourselves this narrative of like, you did it wrong, you did something wrong, rather than like, oh, wow, this just didn't turn out the way I thought it would. But I already know that I can get my dream job. So I just need a new dream job and I'll go get that. Right. Okay. So what feelings are coming up in this? One's a fear response, like, this could be that like, I got my dream job, now what? Or I got my dream job, now what if I lose it, right? That can feel really, really dangerous. Or I accomplished everything that I wanted and now I don't relate to my friends and family as much, or this fear of like rejection or social exclusion or criticism, right? If you've achieved a lot more than say your friend group, right? There can be something that's going on in there. Or like I was just talking about, the fear that you made the wrong decision and that everyone will know that you made the wrong decision, wrong being quote unquote, right? Or you could have fear that you don't have a backup plan, or overwhelm that you don't even know where you would start building the plan. Like these are all very understandable things that would be driving this lack of motivation, right? Because you feel fear, that's going to put you in a freeze state, right? You're just going to stop. Overwhelm is an extreme freeze state. Okay, so but here's what makes total sense, right? Of course, we feel unmotivated when we think thoughts like, it's too hard, or I'm not good enough, or I don't have time, or this isn't what I thought it would be, right? Of course, we feel disappointed and afraid when we've worked really hard and it's not what we expected, right? Like you feel like there's a concept called escalation of commitment, where we'll just keep investing in, even though we know it's like we only look at like the sunk costs, the past expenses, and we keep investing in a thing that we know isn't going to work. right? Like I have a client now who realized fairly quickly that she didn't want to be a lawyer and has moved into a more technical role at a tech company. And now she's got all of those same sort of fears of like what's possible for me. Am I measuring up? Right. Because she's started over. But those are all the thought. They're just coming from her thoughts. And we're working to get her in a couple of weeks from like, I'm about to be fired to I am completely qualified for this job. So side note, I am really, really digressing today. Okay. So, but of course we shrink away from making a change if we feel like we have to do everything right. Right. If there's a right way and a wrong way and a good way and a bad way, then of course we're going to be afraid, especially if we've already made the wrong decision with this dream job. Right. Okay. So what happens is we end up proving our thoughts true. It's too hard and I'm not good enough or I don't have time. Like those are the kind of thoughts that create feelings that lead to actions where we prove that true. We make it too hard. We make it where we're not good enough, right? If I have the thought, I'm not good enough, I feel defeated or insecure, I don't ask for help, I don't go seek external sources, I scroll social media and kind of like try to hide out from this feeling, right? Try to escape the feeling, then what happens is I don't get better, right? So that's what I'm talking about, how we prove our thoughts true. And then we end up settling for a job we don't love to avoid being wrong or having made a mistake, right? So that could be something that's here. But it could just be, in this instance, just something as simple as like the things that we're telling ourselves that about our job that make us want to avoid it, that make us feel unmotivated. So here's the things we're going to try. And I'm going to give you, I'll post these. Actually, I'll post these now in the chat and then we'll put them in the discussion on the live stream later because I know Ashley's going to ask for these. Let me put those in there now. Okay. So a bunch of questions that so we want to create a safe foundation for motivation by recognizing that what's driving the lack of motivation right now, right? And that's going to be our nervous system. If it's coming from like a fear of losing the job, then you can practice thoughts like, I deserve to be seen, or my success is my own, to challenge and weaken this I'm not enough or I'm not doing it right, right? Like we want to just offer a counter narrative to that. And then the questions that I just posted, I would do this as a journal entry. So what are my current thoughts about my job or career? What did I initially think and believe about this job when I first started? And how is that different now? This one would be really interesting. What fears or doubts do I have about my future in this job? What part of this work do I genuinely enjoy or feel energized by? What would make this job feel inspiring again? So do those journal prompts. That's going to help you uncover like what's causing this lack of motivation. So that was question 1. All right, question 2, the big one. I had to get coaching on this myself yesterday before I wrote this for y'all. And I was like, I got to get my own house in order before I can help anybody else. All right, so question 2, how can I manage my anxiety around the election? So what's going on in our nervous system? Is it fight, flight, freeze, or fawn? Like the answer is yes, right? All of them. Like which one is it? All of them, right? Doesn't really matter what your desired outcome for this election is. All of the feelings are the same if you're anxious about it, right? So sometimes it's fight, right? Like we want to go nag our sister-in-law who's about to vote for Trump. I don't know who would do that, but sometimes we go into flight and we avoid. We're just like, I'm doing this partially right now, right? I'm watching a little bit of news each day, and then I'm only watching channels that don't have any ads or don't have political ads. So there's that, right? Or sometimes we go into overwhelm, right? And just feel like the whole world is about to burn down. And that puts us in a freeze response. So what happens is we're in this constant and intangible stress, and it's like revving up an engine and making you exhausted, but we're not going anywhere. The engine is just really revving, right? Like it doesn't change. All of the anxiety that we have doesn't often almost always translate into any action that can change anything. So it's like we're sitting in the garage with the engine running and the gas tank running out for no real purpose. So what's going on with our socialization? So there is a part, particularly for people socialized as women, we're conditioned to be hyper aware for our safety. And this can be like literal and figurative at this point, right? The one wrong move could derail everything kind of feeling. And then we go spinning out in the what if, right? Like that's where I've been, right? Like, what are we going to do if this happens? What are we going to do if this happens? And then we feel responsible for everyone's comfort, but it's all up in the air. We're conditioned to feel like we can actually change how people feel about us and about the world, right? But the only thing, like, we can only ever be a fact in someone else's narrative, right? And then all the story that they tell themselves about it, like we have no control over whatever they think about us, whatever they feel about us. We never have any control over that. So what kind of feelings are we feeling? We're feeling anxiety, right? The unknown outcome of the election and what that means for humanity, right? You could be going really big the way that my brain starts spinning out. You can feel anger at your friends or relatives and those people who see things in a way that we can't comprehend, right? We can have imaginary arguments, imaginary debates, imaginary situations where someone changes their mind because we give them this one perfect little gem that helps them understand our viewpoint, right? And there's also this element of fear because we'll be reliving the disappointment, some of us, from 8 years ago, right? And how will we possibly be able to manage it? How much worse it could be this time, right? Like all of these thoughts that are creating so much fear and anxiety in us, right? And that's revving engine and it doesn't have anywhere to go and it doesn't have any positive sort of result from it. And then the final thing is a sense of helplessness and maybe even resignation because we feel like we don't have any control. I got a little bit of coaching yesterday. I had been giving her all of these scenarios, like the sort of catastrophizing that it was going on in my brain. And she was just like, okay, a lot of people will be harmed. Now what? And I was like, oh, then I have to figure out where to plug in. And like all of a sudden, I went from feeling helpless and powerless to feeling empowered. And then my brain started giving me more ideas of like, we're in such a much better position than we were 8 years ago. We're so much better organized. We have the folks that we can turn to and the organizations that we can plug into. And like, it's so different. Like we're also ready for it in a way that we weren't before. And so for me, and I don't know if you can borrow those thoughts and they feel good for you, but for me, that took my anxiety like from like 100 to like a 5, at least temporarily, until I start doing these things. But if I keep coming back to it, it's really like dramatically lowered my anxiety. But how does this make total sense? Okay. So of course you feel on edge because you've been told to like always stay alert for your own safety, right? Of course your brain is in a loop. It's trying to figure out what to do to keep you safe, right? Of course the stakes feel high when you've been socialized to believe any shift can jeopardize all that you've worked for, right? For women and people in marginalized identities, a lot of times we don't get a second chance, right? And so that can translate into something like this, where we feel like we've only got this one chance to figure it out. And if we don't, then we're totally screwed, right? And of course, your reaction feels out of proportion because society tells women that they're too emotional or they're overreacting. So what do we do? So what happens is the tension keeps building. It interrupts our sleep and it damages our interpersonal relationships, right? Like I'm only damaging my interpersonal relationship with my sister-in-law in my head. So then it's only hurting me. We spin out in the what ifs with no answers, right? And that makes us feel more helpless. Like we're like revving that engine in a circle, right? It morphs into chronic exhaustion and sometimes even to resignation. So when I was preparing this yesterday, I also started thinking about there's a woman, Renee DiResta, and she's like the leading expert on like misinformation and disinformation. She has a book called Invisible Rulers that's really amazing. But I saw her speak several years ago after she was like the lead data person across social media platforms, figuring out like the Russia disinformation and misinformation campaign in 2016, 2015, 2016. And so I always keep coming back to this one idea. And like, I hope maybe it encourages you to not feel resigned and to not completely unplug, like unplug for your own well-being, but don't just throw in the towel and give up. Because she talked about like a key objective of disinformation campaigns isn't necessarily to convince people of a single false narrative, but to create confusion, sow doubt, and make people feel so overwhelmed that they disengage altogether. This is a tactic often referred to as cognitive overload, where the sheer volume of conflicting information creates a sense of helplessness, leading individuals to tune out or lose trust in all sources, even credible ones. So I think there's something like that's the macro thing that we want to just make sure that we don't get so overwhelmed and frustrated that we become where we just give up and like let things that we don't want to happen. So I don't know if that goes too deep for y'all, but it really, I heard her say it years and years ago, and I keep coming back to it every time I think of like, I just want to check out. I just don't want to do this work anymore. I don't want to I just want to like go back into a bubble where none of this exists. And then I remind myself that like, that's the goal. And that keeps me going. Okay. So tips to try for this. Y'all are so quiet in the chat. I don't even know what's going on. Like you've never been this quiet. It's wild. But let me know what's going on. But here's the tips to try. And then if y'all, we can stop the live stream. And if y'all want to come off and just talk about this and get some coaching on it, I am perfectly happy to use some of our networking time that way too. So, but here's our tips. Okay. To complete the stress cycle, you need to have a care plan of like, this is the small, medium, and big things, right? Like if I'm feeling like I have one client who really likes like scented candles. And so she buys herself like these very fancy ones. I'm not a scented candle person. They make me sneeze, but like if that's your jam, do something like that, right? Like my plan is to scream into a pillow if I just really only have 1 minute and I just need to get it out. Right? You can go cry. Like there's so many ways to complete the stress cycle. So you can even, did I put that in here? But you can, the Nagowski sisters, Amelia and, I thought I put that in these notes, but I didn't. The Nagowski sisters wrote a book called Burnout. But if you just Google or ask ChatGPT, what would Amelia and Emily Nagowski suggest as 100 ways I could complete the stress cycle? Like get yourself a toolkit, prepare a self-care, complete the stress cycle kind of thing, and have a plan to care for yourself next week. Just have that plan ready this week so that while we're waiting and while it's back and forth, or particularly if we don't get the result that we want, that we have a plan already in place to take care of ourselves, because we need to plan that with the prefrontal cortex now, because our nervous system is going to be too overwhelmed next week to be able to really pull it off. So that's the thing. And then as far as like challenging, like your doomsday thoughts, I would call mine that, right? Asking yourself, is the thought helping or hindering me? And if it's only adding to the anxiety, practice letting it go, right? Replace it with, I am capable of handling whatever comes. Whatever the fear is, assume it's a fact, and then ask, then what? Like my coach did with me yesterday, right? So a lot of people will be harmed. Then what? Right? And that really, it took me out of like this passive, like all of this is happening to me. And like, if that's a fact, then here's what I would do next. Right. And it got me out of that like overwhelm. And then do you feel less helpless when you think that thought? Like I feel much less helpless when I think I have to figure out where I'm going to plug in. Right. And then you can add some nuance and shift the narrative. So instead of fixating on what you want to be able to control, you can start telling yourself, I can't control this, but I can choose how I respond, right? Do I want to respond by being in the garage with my engine revving, going nowhere? right? Just using up all of that gas and all of that energy and having not even getting to go on a fun drive, right? And then you can use self-compassion as like a power tool. So you remind yourself it's okay to feel rattled and frustrated or scared. Like the more that you're like, just give yourself a moment and be like, I am safe, right? Or you are safe, whichever makes more sense to you. But also, like, it makes total sense that you're scared, right? Of course, you are scared right now. There are these things that are happening, right? And show yourself that compassion. Get back into your body, but also honor that part of you because those are very real, very necessary feelings that you're going to have,